Welcome to the video, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anbraxas. Today we're going to be continuing that Rated Battleground series that I was talking about. Last video we showed you a couple of compositions between me and Ori. This was just so people had somewhere to start for those who are really gung-ho about getting Rated Battlegrounds in the very first week of the season. Because they removed that 2200 cap, I really don't feel like there's any super rush. So now I can kind of slow down just a little bit, not too much. I'll be putting out videos at a very regular pace. I'm going to try to pick up the pace here. But in this video, we're going to be talking more about compositions, a little bit into the strategy, a little bit about the different components of Rated Battlegrounds. I'll be trying to do a separate video on each one of these things that I'm talking about, but I wanted to give you guys some more different compositions that you could try out if maybe you're still forming a team or you want to try something different. Now this is going to end up being a long video, so there's going to be time codes in the description of this video so you can skip to different parts that are going to be relevant to you. In this video I'll be taking some clips from Ori's 2500 Rated Battleground, some from his Temple of Cope Magoo, some from his Warsong Gulch. I'll be using some of my own clips. Other than that, I'll have to run a little PvP in between. It's really hard to get a lot of B-roll footage for these kind of videos, particularly since Rated Battlegrounds have the tendency to go either really right or really wrong. And I haven't quite formed my team yet, so I'll be running some PvP in between, but I'll be giving you guys visual cues, that way you can relate to what I'm talking about. That being said, this is really going to be one of those videos where you're going to have to listen to what I'm talking about. It might be a good video to kind of minimize at certain points and maybe do some dailies in between. So let's go ahead and get into it. I got a lot of comments on the last video. I know people are asking for arena stuff. I do think we have some people working on arena things. I don't personally do arena videos. Maybe I will in the future, some Fury arena videos or something like that. But those are coming. Other than that, I got questions about where do hunters fit into Rated Battlegrounds, where do elemental shamans fit in. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. When it comes to specialty classes, kind of like the elemental shaman, hunters, and stuff like that, typically the Rated Battleground kind of has to be designed around it. So if you guys happen to be an elemental shaman or hunter or maybe a ret paladin, you might want to consider leading your own Rated Battlegrounds. That way you can form the team around you, because a lot of teams aren't just going to bring you in right away. I'm sorry, but that's the actual truth behind things. People find out what the best teams to run with are, and they tend to stick to that. They don't really like to deviate from them because they think it gives them the best advantage. I'm kind of here to tell you today that's not necessarily true. Pretty much any team has just as much chance as any other team of succeeding in Rated Battlegrounds, as long as you guys have really good communication skills. So what goes into Rated Battlegrounds? Well, there's a few key components to a Rated Battleground that you need to get nailed down before you even start forming a group. And I will do separate videos on these. I don't really want to include them in this video, but I'm just going to touch on them briefly. So the first thing you're going to need a Rated Battleground leader. This is going to be the guy who's going to make the tough calls. He's going to be telling people where to go, what positions to be in, how they're supposed to be set up for Rated Battlegrounds, talents, etc. There's a lot of weight riding on this guy's head because usually he ends up making decisions that either win or lose a Rated Battleground. You got to kind of give this guy some slack. Not only does he have to get the team together, which can quite honestly at times take over 2 or 3 hours to get a good team set together, or waiting for people to get online and whatnot. So cut your Rated Battleground leader some slack. If they're new, let them learn. Don't abandon them after one loss, and it'll pay off in the long run. So the second, probably most important part about Rated Battlegrounds is going to be your target caller. Now, this guy has to have the voice, and you know what I'm talking about when I say the voice. It's one of those guys where when they talk, he's really hard to ignore. When he calls something out like, hey, look at that mage, everybody kind of just looks at him. Just because the guy's talking. You need one of those people. And it's always good to have more than one target caller in your group, particularly for node maps and for the rare occasion where your target caller is going to die. Now that target caller typically is going to be a Frost Death Knight. It can really be any class as long as it's not the FC or the healers. Flag carriers tend to at times get stuck in rooms away from the fight. It's usually not good to have them doing it, and the healers are typically a little too busy trying to keep each other alive to actually be doing the target calling. You can have one of your ranged DPS do it. You just have to keep in mind, if you have melee like Death Knights, Rogues, etc., it's going to take them a little more time to get from A to B and start attacking your target. So those are really the basic components of what goes into a rated battleground. Of course, the number one component and the most important part of a rated battleground is going to be your communication skills. And this is the most important part of any rated battleground. You can take some of the crappiest compositions that you can think of, and as long as you guys are communicating and working together well, they'll succeed. So we're just going to examine a clip here from Ori. You can hear that his team's talking in the background. I put a little text over their voices. I didn't get all the names right, so they're actually just named like Shaman, Mage, etc. That way you know who's talking. You can see what the rated battleground leader is hearing, because basically what this guy's doing is he's intaking all this information and making the decisions. The target caller's using this information to see who he's going to be attacking. For an example, say the Mage says so-and-so has blown their trinket, or they pop their bubble, etc. That would alert the target caller that that person's vulnerable. Maybe someone calls out from a node that, hey, the rogue's gone missing, or something like that. That tells the rated battleground leader he needs to elect somebody to send somewhere. And a lot of those decisions can really be delegated before the battleground starts. You can have someone set up, say if you do bring a hunter, you can say, Hunter, at any point, if any of the nodes call out, you will be the one going there, etc. and so forth. We'll be covering more about that in the Rated Battlegrounds Leader video, which will be coming here in the near future. But today I'm talking about compositions and how those work. Now, as far as compositions are concerned, you already got our compositions from the last video, where you have the 3 heals, the Prot Warrior Flag Carrier, you've got your Frost Death Knight target calling, and then you've typically got 2 casters, maybe another melee DPS, maybe 2 DPS, maybe a hunter, shaman, etc. I'm going to be giving you a couple of new compositions, and we'll be talking about those and how they can work together, because you already kind of know how the other compositions are going to work. So the number one composition that I want to give you, and this is probably the most solid one that I came up with during beta that really didn't quite work out when it came to patch 5.1 and patch 5.2. This composition consisted of a Holy Paladin and Disc Priest, a Resto Druid, Frost Death Knight target caller, Elemental Shaman, Boomkin, Frost Mage, Destro Lock, and Rogue. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, that's not a typical composition. You have an Elemental Shaman in here. And the whole point of me bringing the Elemental Shaman is for the maximum CC chain, or at least that's what I like to call it in Rated Battlegrounds. It's kind of the unescapable CC chain that you can run into once in a while. Now, basically the way this functions, and I'm going to go ahead and move this text over here in the upper right corner so you can see who I'm talking about. The basic way that this composition is going to work is you're going to have that Resto Druid go ahead, symbiosis with the Elemental Shaman. That'll give the Elemental Shaman Solar Beam, which is pretty important for this particular strategy. Now, you've already got Solar Beam and Vortex on your Boomkin. If you don't, you might want to go ahead and set your Boomkin up with that. You've got your Frost Ring from your Mage, you've got your Mass Grip from your Death Knight. Destro Locks used to be a little more useful because the Rain of Fire used to have a periodic stun on it. That's why the Elemental Shaman is worked in here. You can do it with a Restoration Shaman if you decide to swap out your Disc Priest. I just threw the Disc Priest in there because during this composition, the Elemental Shaman will actually be exposed if he doesn't have Totemic Projection, and I don't recommend him have that. I'd rather have him have Call of the Elements, which resets his totem cooldowns. But just in the odd case that the Disc Priest needs to life swap with them or throw out some mass dispels, that's why he's there in the first place. So the basic way this composition is going to work is for flag carrying maps, you're going to have that initial clash where you pop in the middle. And typically these clashes are dictated by who gets the first grip off first. So what you're going to do is you're going to have your Frost Death Knight go ahead, mass grip everybody into the Mage's Ring. Now the Mage's Ring has a 2-second ticker now before it goes off, even if it's a palm ring. So the Death Knight needs to keep that in mind. So the ring's going to go down, the Death Knight's going to mass grip into that ring. Now everyone's going to get frozen. And for the beginning of patch 5.0 and patch 5.1, typically that was going to be good enough for everybody to just get by. They could maybe single out one DPS or a healer or something and just flat out kill them right off the bat while everyone's frozen, because everyone's a little bit nervous to pop their trinkets because then they'll be vulnerable to cyclones, etc. People are a lot more willing to pop their trinkets now in this initial encounter. And that's where the other classes are really going to come into play. So now not only is the Death Knight going to be mass gripping into the ring, you're also going to have your Boomkin be throwing down Solar Beam on top of the ring itself and be throwing in a Vortex in there. That makes sure classes like Restoration Druids, Feral Druids, Prot Warriors, anybody with a Rapid Dash isn't going to be able to get out of that sphere, basically. If they try to exit, the Vortex is going to pull them back in. However, just for some extra added protection, we can also have the Elemental Shaman throw down a second Solar Beam after 2 seconds. He can actually run in, throw down Earth Grab Totem and Capacitor Totem, which is going to hold them in place until the Capacitor Totem goes off. They're already still sitting in that Solar Beam. Stun's going to go off. The Shaman can use Call of Elements and do it again if necessary. But to be completely honest, even if some of them have popped Trinkets, you're still looking at about, I guess, around 10 seconds of crowd control. You should be able to AoE that group down at least. If not, you should have killed at least 2 or 3 of the healers. Really devastating combo. You can see that on your screen. I've been illustrating here for the past few minutes. Now this is a slowed down version that I recorded last night. This was just a bunch of friends that I had together. I got them together just to show you guys this. You know, I've been gripped into the ring, and then I've had the Solar Beam thrown on top of me. Unfortunately, the Restoration Shaman, who was taking the place of the Elemental Shaman, we couldn't get the phasing right, so he had to be on my team. But trust me, even if you Trinket, try to leap out, etc., which the Warrior, if out of any classes, would be the one to be able to get out of this combo, it's just not possible, particularly once you have the Shaman in there rooting you to the ground. You'd have to rely on someone else being outside and intervening banners, etc. It's a very, very devastating CC chain. And the whole point of me showing you this is because you look at this composition from the very start and you say, wow, that is going to be a bullcrap composition. But when you take into account all the different abilities of the different classes, and you factor in that pretty much everyone's going to get murdered in the first few seconds of the rated battleground, it becomes particularly devastating. But it takes a high amount of coordination between everybody. And I mean, you can continue to compound upon this. Once everything's going on, you could even have the rogue come in and throw down a smoke bomb just in case any healers get on the outside. Now, as far as strategies go, for this particular composition, and I know this is getting a little long-winded, but unfortunately there's no way around this. It was just going to be a long video. For this particular composition, on node maps, typically you would have your Warlock sitting out with his Shivarin pet on a node, and you would have the Rogue guarding a node, or you'd have your Warrior guarding a node. It depends on what maps you're on. Those would be the 3 classes you're going to sit on different nodes. If you're talking about flag carrying maps, your Rogue's going to be your go-to guy. You're going to be sitting, if they have like a Mistweaver Monk or something like that, that Rogue's going to be sitting on that guy. If the Rogue isn't sitting on him, he's going to be sitting on one of the other healers. You can basically delegate different parts of your DPS to CCing particular people. For an example, you say, Mage, every time polymorphs off cooldown, I want it on this healer. Now, of course, if he's going to be polymorphing that healer on a regular basis, you aren't going to be wanting to attack them. But you see where I'm going with this. It's all about the coordination of your group and what kind of communication skills they have. So before we go into some more different compositions, because I'm not going to talk about those as long, I want to revisit that first video that I showed you where we were talking about Ori's team and how they were communicating with each other. And this is where the Rated Battleground Leader comes into play. The Rated Battleground Leader is taking in all that information and delegating different things to different parts of the raid group. For an example, he's telling the Rogue, go ahead and sit on blah 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 healer, etc. That's the kind of communication that you need in your battleground. The RBG leader needs to know who has what cooldown, who's used what cooldown, etc. and so forth. More on that in the Rated Battlegrounds Leaders video. Alright, so now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and go into some other compositions that you could try running. This one's going to be pretty similar to the last one, except it's going to be set up for a 4-heal team, which has a huge advantage on maps like Temple of Cut Magoo, Silver Shard Mines, and node maps. Now, 4-heal teams you really didn't see a lot in patch 5.1 and patch 5.0. And that's because the damage just wasn't there. You needed as much burst as you could to get through the healing. Bring more healers, your damage goes down, but if you can somehow ninja nodes, etc., you're going to be in a really good position. So this composition is going to be a Holy Paladin healer. I mean, of course you're going to have your Prot Warrior, Holy Paladin, Restoration Shaman, Resto Druid, Discipline Priest. Now, I know you guys are saying, why don't you bring a Mist Weaver Monk? Discipline Priest and Mist Weaver Monks are totally interchangeable with each other. They both have their own benefits, etc. I'm just more familiar with Disc Priest. I like running with Disc Priest. It's totally up to you if you want to run with the Mist Weaver. Mist Weavers are great for teams that have rogues and warriors on them because of their, I guess, like phase shift ability. Every time they're stunned, they're unattackable for a couple of seconds. Don't get me wrong, Mist Weavers are pretty darn good. You're going to have your Frost Death Knight, you're going to have a couple of Frost Mages, or a Frost Mage and a couple of Locks, and then you're going to have your Rogue. Now, this team's going to be pretty weak on DPS, but you have to factor in, what is this team going to be able to do on node maps? For flag carrying maps, you're really going to be waiting for stacks, and you're going to be trying to do like a stealth team. You're going to be having your Fire and Frost Mages, or your double Frost, double Lock, whatever you have going on. You're going to be having those group stealthing with the Rogue to try to surprise the enemy flag carrier. There is a lot of CC still on this team. Each mage can lock down a healer pretty effectively. Even the Warlock can lock them down. The Rogue can lock them down. And it's still effective for flag carrying maps, but you're really going to be waiting on stacks, which is pretty risky business, but since you have 4 healers, it's not as risky as normal. 4 heal teams, still a little weak on the DPS, but you still have the ability to set up great sap cap teams. Maybe you don't need 2 bases right off the start on node maps. Mages and rogues working together has always been a really good strategy. I mean, you can always have your rogue go off with that Restoration Druid. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from going into Prowl and sneaking up for a sap cap. That strategy's come back into play because rogues now have a shorter cooldown on their blind than trinkets do. So if you got a Prot Warrior and he doesn't have the backup while his trinket's down, that rogue should be able to take that base out no problem. Now we're kind of going to get out on the fringe of compositions. These are kind of experimental compositions because I'm not entirely sure how they're going to work out. I've seen some things with the class balance changes, and what I'd like to try, and maybe you guys can try for me and let me know how it works. It is kind of risky, but this composition is going to be a Brewmaster Monk, Holy Paladin, Resto Druid, Resto Shaman. So we're cutting the Disc Priest out of this one altogether. FDK, target calling. You're going to have your Elemental Shaman symbiosis with the Restoration Druid. That way you still have your Solar Beam. You can still do the grip into the ring because you're going to have your Mage. This time around, though, instead of bringing like a double Mage or a double Lock, you could either substitute in a Unholy Death Knight, because Unholy Death Knights have gotten relatively good in the last patch, or you can bring in a Hunter in this composition. I would suggest a Hunter because it frees up your Rogue to try to push on nodes, etc. I'd personally like to run a Hunter in this composition, but it'll be Holy Paladin, Resto Druid, Resto Shaman, FDK, Elemental Shaman with the symbiosis, of course, Unholy Death Knight, Frost Mage, Affliction or Destro Lock, and then the Rogue. Again, if you really had to, your node sitters would be your FC. Brewmasters are really not that good at guarding nodes, at least nowhere near as good as warriors are. I would highly suggest having that Brewmaster have a Windwalker set. If he has a Windwalker set, they can be particularly devastating with that Ring of Peace. But if you absolutely need to, Brewmasters can defend a node. They just need a little extra support from everybody else. Your node sitters are going to be your Warlock and your Rogue most likely. That or your Hunter. It depends on what you want to do. A lot of Hunters really dislike being left at nodes nonstop. Unfortunately, that's just the positions the position that they've been put in the past few years. You know, if you've ever heard the joking term rank 1 node sitter, that would be your Hunter. Hunters are pretty darn viable once you have them out on the field. Arathi Basin, they're great. Like, they're probably a little bit better than Shaman at getting that knockoff on Arathi Basin at Lumber Mill. They're great for defending nodes, though, on Eye of the Storm. particularly if they're taking like a Blood Elf Tower or Mage Tower. Just that explosive trap's absolutely devastating. They're a lot better at stopping the side caps, etc. on Mage Tower. I would definitely like to see Hunters get worked a little more into this composition. This is going to be another viable composition for you. Again, I'm not totally sure on the Brewmaster Monk. You could substitute in a Feral Druid Monk. This isn't a fast cap team composition though. This is just something for you to try if you've wanted to work Monk in who's not necessarily going to be a Windwalker or a Mistweaver. So that composition's there for you, and I've explained that out for you. Of course, just talking briefly about this same composition, your CC chain's still going to be a little bit weaker, but again, you'll still be able to have that grip into a ring, into the solar beam, into the root, into the stun, into the smoke bomb, and then if you really, really need it, you can also have that Unholy Death Knight go into Remorseless Winter and use that. Not to mention that Death Knight could also really lock down a healer. Unholy Death Knights are pretty darn good at melting a healer's face. Alright, so here's another composition for you guys to try. Again, it's a little more risky of a composition. It's pretty similar to the last one, but this time, instead of bringing the Brewmaster Monk, you're going to be trying it with a Feral Druid. Again, Feral Druids are a little bit more risky than Prot Warriors if you're not going for a fast cap team. Again, I like working that Elemental Shaman in there. I personally play with an Elemental Shaman. I like having him on my team. You can substitute that Elemental Shaman out for another Mage or a Warlock, no problem. Nothing will really go wrong there. You'll just be missing another Solar Beam, and you'll be missing a stun because the Warrior lost his Shockwave. You gotta remember that. Warriors don't have Shockwave anymore. So if you can get a class with a stun, that's gonna be to your advantage. So this composition is going to be Feral Flag Carrier, Holy Paladin. I always like running with the Holy Paladin. They're great at AoE heals for group fights. Then we're going to have that Mistweaver. Mistweavers can be a little bit on the risky side because they really can get locked down. They do have a few heals that they can throw out, but when it comes down to Soothing Mist, that's a pretty long channel, really easy to interrupt. You got to be careful with your Mistweaver. Be watching their back. Then you're going to have your Restoration Druid, Frost Death Knight. Like I said, like running with the Elemental Shaman, you can substitute it out for a Destrolock just for the sake of this composition because you've heard me talk a lot about the Elemental Shamans. We're going to go ahead, do a double lock on this one. So you got 2 Warlocks, Beast Mastery Hunter. I would definitely give Survival or Marksman Hunters a chance here. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but I have had a few hunters say to me, hey, you know, our other specs really aren't that bad. So you might want to talk to your local hunter or whoever's in your group and really get a feel for them there. And you're going to have your Fire Mage and your Rogue. Again, all these compositions, I liked running with Rogues in Cataclysm. They were really strong in Cataclysm. They're really, really strong now. Unless Blizzard comes in and royally screws them over again, you're going to see a lot of Rogues in Rated Battlegrounds, particularly that that sped up cooldown timer on blinds, really devastating because people tend to leave their Prot Warrior guarding a node, and that Prot Warrior's always going to have to call for help when there's a Rogue there. Even if he stays in combat with that Rogue the whole time, blind's going to come up before his trinket does, so there's another composition for you. I mean, at the same time, any of these compositions, if you really wanted to, now I've never done this in Mist of Pandaria, I really don't know how they're faring, but you can bring a Feral Kitty Druid. I know, I'm so weird, I call them Feral Tank and Feral Kitty Druids. Whatever. You bring a Feral Kitty Druid to take place of your Rogue. I mean, you could still have that extra Vortex, etc. I don't necessarily see them being that bad. They are pretty viable. You can sub them in for the Rogue. But of course, then you could always bring in that Windwalker Monk for that Blanket Silence, Blanket Disarm. So that's kind of touching on all these different compositions that I wanted to hand to you guys. I mean, like I said, it really comes down to your communication skills in your team. You can pretty much make any composition work, hands down, as long as you've got that solid communication skills and you've got a great RBG leader, great target caller. You can pretty much make anything work. Now, to briefly touch on some of the classes that you don't typically see in Rated Battlegrounds, people ask me all the time, why can't I come on my Ret Paladin? And there's a few good reasons for not bringing a Ret Paladin. While it is nice to have a Ret Paladin come in because they can give you that extra lay on hands, etc., I do believe they can still give you lay on hands. Not entirely sure on that one, because they did change the rules for Rated Battlegrounds. While they do have that lay on hands and stuff like that, and their bubbles and whatnot, they just don't bring enough CC to the group. You can't really sit them on somebody and say, go ahead and sit on X class and make sure they don't cast or make sure they don't do this. Unfortunately, their burst, just like Warriors, is really tied to their cooldowns. They're awesome for a few seconds, and then they're kind of crap for a little bit longer, and then good, then bad, then good, then bad. They're just kind of unreliable, and it's really unfortunate. I really think Blizzard needs to take a hard look at the Paladin and really figure out what they're going to do with that class. I mean, they're great tanks and they're great healers, but if they were going to just be those two things and not really be capable of doing awesome DPS, I don't know what to say about it. Shamans I'm sorry, not Shamans, but Paladins are just kind of in a rough place when it comes to Ret. Before anybody asks, Enhancement Shamans, it's the same story there. Yes, you can do the same thing that Elemental Shaman does with his totems, etc. But the only difference between that Elemental Shaman and Enhancement one is the Enhancement guy's got to be right up in everybody's face in melee range of that Death Knight. Death Knights typically give Enhancement Shamans a run for their money. Enhancement Shamans really don't have any good escape abilities. You know, Death Knight's got anti-magic shell, Warriors with spell reflex, etc., shield walls. Shamans just don't have that to save their butt if they get focused. So that's kind of why we don't bring Enhancement Shamans. I know there's a lot of you guys out there, and it kind of sucks that you guys don't have a spot. But that's just the way it is. You know, you don't have a whole lot of CC. Like, Hex is good and all, but you're just too disposable. You get bursted too easy, and that's basically why they suck for Rated Battlegrounds. I'm trying to think of a couple other classes that we don't typically bring to Rated Battlegrounds. Holy Priest. I'm not entirely sure why people don't bring Holy Priest. They bring Disc Priest because of the Spirit Shells, etc., the Power Word auras, and all that good stuff. I have seen a lot of 4-heal teams bring in a Holy Priest, and they've done pretty good. They do have that advantage of when they die, they'll be able to heal for a little bit longer. But unfortunately, because they don't have the shields and the absorbs and stuff, they just lose out in the long run compared to Disc Priest. Shadow Priest, on the other hand, perfectly acceptable, interchangeable with a Warlock. They do pretty nice damage. Blizzard definitely did right by Shadow Priest, so I think it's totally acceptable that Holy Priest really isn't a PvP spec. I'm sure some of you out there feel completely different than I do, but I think that's a fair trade-off that one of your 3 specs isn't PvP viable. But I think that's going to kind of cover it up for what classes you can bring to Rated Battlegrounds and why some aren't necessarily brought more than others. If you're playing a class and you want to know why, I mean, at least you can ask me personally in the comments why we don't bring certain classes. Maybe you play a class that I just didn't think of. Leave it in the comments. I'll give you a detailed answer. As far as you tanks are concerned, I know there's going to be someone out there that, why can't I RBG Holy or Prot Paladin, etc. We'll be covering that in the Flag Carriers video, or he's currently working on a Warrior, Prot Warrior, or blah blah blah, English, a Prot Warrior video, teaching you how to do all that good stuff, so look forward to that. We'll be I think we're going to be working together to cover the different Flag Carriers and talking about those. That's about going to wrap it up for this video, guys. I'm Anbraxas. Of course, 24-hour cooldown starts now. Please try to keep things limited to Rated Battlegrounds. What do you need to know? I try to put these videos out based on what information people need quicker. For an example, like help, I don't know what healers to use. We'll be doing an entire video on healers as well. So leave in the comments what you want to see. As always, I've been Anbraxas. If you want to find a complete playlist of all the videos I'm making here for TG and World of Warcraft, go over to my personal channel and subscribe up. I'll have a playlist for you set up there, and you'll be able to catch all my Rated Battleground content. I've included a lot of stuff that was from Cataclysm in there that is still pertinent information for Mist of Pandaria if you're looking for a little extra stuff immediately. Other than that, I'll be continuing to make the videos. This is Anbraxas, and I'll catch you later.